All right, Coach Walker, thank you for sitting down meeting with me today to do this teacher interview. I know it's Friday. Appreciate you taking time after school hours. To begin, just kind of tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name's Jacob Walker. I'm a graduate of Claiborne High School, or of Carson Newman University. I got my undergraduate work actually in psychology, and was hired as a TA in the school system, and realized that I enjoyed teaching and loved being around the kids, and I went back and got my master's in the art of teaching with a special ed education emphasis. I just getting ready to finish that up, and I've really enjoyed it. I've been teaching for about 2 years. Teach on the high school level, and my classes, as you know, range from interview and workplace etiquette all the way to world history to adaptive PE.
Right. So tell me a little bit more about the undergrad in psychology. Do you think that helps you, hinders you when it comes to teaching special ed? How do you feel about your psychology undergrad?
I feel like the psychology did help me. There's a lot of things, that you look at that I had to study while I was in undergrad, as far as how the mind works, how the human body interacts with the mind, and why people do what they do.
Right.
And it really kind of gives you an insight into the world of special education and gives you a background knowing that, okay, this individual has a certain disability.
Right.
And that disability causes them to lack in other areas.
Sure. Okay, moving on. Some of the state standards, yours kind of tend to be a little bit different when it comes to just the general education standards. How do you tie in standards to your lessons, lesson plans, and how do you go about teaching?
So I started the beginning of the year when I'm planning for the upcoming semester, where I teach some different direct service special ed classes with all special education students. I sit down when I'm creating my scope and sequence for the year, and I look at the standards that have to be covered. I take those standards and break them into each kind of mini unit that I want to go over,
Right.
and then I make my modifications to my lessons to fit those standards.
Right.
In my lesson plans, we're still covering, the standard just like a non-special education class would cover. It just sometimes takes a little bit longer.
Right.
There's usually a little bit more reteaching, a lot more scaffolding, and really trying to support those kids to understand everything. But we still get the same standards accomplished. It really sets the flow of how my semester is going to go. Is
Right.
What are the standards, and what can we do to allow my students to understand those standards in
Right.
different ways.
So in your work-based learning classes, are there state standards that you have to cover for that general class?
So in work-based learning, there are standards that, yes, the state has, such as requiring, talking about workplace safety, different, and the paperwork and everything that goes along with that work-based learning. There's guidelines and standards and topics that have to be covered, and that's kind of how the class is shaped.
Sure. I know this week's testing week. Next week we're testing. Tell me about how you prepare your students for their standardized assessments.
We do a lot of review. We do a lot of breaking down concepts so that they understand the big picture. For a lot of my kids, it's getting used to the way that the test goes. So, we don't teach the test per se, but we kind of teach, this is how it's going to be. This is what you're going to be able to experience. Don't panic, take your time, do what you need to do. The information, we've covered it. And really try to lower that anxiety, because what we found out is that anxiety leads to them performing at a, worse. Yeah, at a lot lower.
Right.
But if you get them used to it and they practice, they know the material. And, it's all about just practicing and making sure that they're fully, covered in the information that's going to be on it.
Right. So in your classroom, if you have a disciplinary policy, could you kind of describe it to me?
a discipline like policy as if somebody does something wrong.
Right. Like, do you have classroom rules? Do you have, I know syllabus are huge now in classrooms. In the syllabus that you hand out, is there a discipline guide?
Yeah, so I go over, on my syllabus, I always put the school rules.
Right.
Because a lot of times, kids kind of hear them briefly at the beginning, and then they never really get touched on again.
Right.
I have computers in my room, so the kids know, no food or drink around the computers. In times past, I've had kids with severe special education kids with severe discipline problems.
Right.
So I'm very strict on what goes on in here and what goes on. It's in the syllabus. We touch on it probably every week and a half, just so they stay reminded. Because not everybody enforces everything.
Sure.
And so I try to do a good job of making sure, we're not cussing. The tobacco use is not in my class. And I set from day one, the first couple weeks, I try to be as strict on every minute thing there is, because they learn that they're not going to be able to get away with anything.
Right. And it's a lot different in a high school classroom than what it would be in an elementary school. There's no cards to go pull here. So it's a little bit different. You mentioned cussing, tobacco, something that is not in lower elementary school level that you have to deal with here.
And I work hand in hand with our discipline with administration, and they do a good job with, if I need them, they come down here.
Right.
And we kind of handle more larger situations a little bit differently.
Right. So as you've said, you're in special education. How do you meet some of the students' needs with these IEPs? Those that need some accommodations. How do you go about handling those kind of things?
So with most of my classes being a direct service, which means I have all special ed kids kids with learning disabilities, kids with health impairments, kids. Kind of the whole gamut of special education I'll have in my classrooms. And I sit down and kind of look at the IEP goals for each kid. Most of them, I have written myself because they're on my caseload, but our special education staff works well together.
Right.
So we know what the goals are, we know what the accommodations are, and with it being a special education class, everything's accommodated. Everything's tailored to each individual student, so that all learning needs are met and the goals are met.
Right. So communication with parents. I know there's a lot of stuff going on in other places and school systems that have built-in websites and Twitters and all kinds of things to communicate with parents. I know IEP meetings are a huge part of your job. Is there any other communication with parents outside of the IEP meetings that is being done?
Yeah, so when we kind of periodically pull grades to ensure that our students are staying up with their work. Right. Grade issues, behavior problems, truancy problems. We don't hesitate to call parents, because we've learned that most parents are very receptive to the constant communication of and talking about it now, as opposed to at the end of the 9 weeks saying, why did he fail?
Yeah.
Well, he didn't do this 6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And so we stay in constant communication, but most of it is IEP meetings.
Right. Just a couple more questions. What would you say is probably your biggest challenge of this job?
My biggest challenge is probably, I would say the refusal of services that we've kind of seen a shift towards here recently of kids not wanting to work in special education, kids not wanting to work, not wanting help, and not caring if they fail.
Right.
Because we're faced with a dilemma that, you can't just pass them through, because then they never learn anything.
Exactly.
But you can't let all, 38 kids, I can't let all 38 kids on my caseload fail Algebra 1, because then we're all going to be back in Algebra 1 the next year. And then our Algebra 1 classes are 60, 70 kids, and that's not good.
Right.
But the biggest challenge is, getting those kids to want to do better and, realize that they have to take the initiative to do it. We're here to help them figure that out.
Right.
And that biggest challenge is just that refusal of service.
Right. So on the flip side of that, and this is the last question, what would you consider to be the most rewarding part of your job?
Student interaction.
Student interaction.
The positive interactions you can get. I had a kid yesterday come up to me and say, Coach, and I know that I struggle in reading. And I said, yes. And he says, but you make teaching fun, and I want to be a teacher. Can I do that even though I struggle with reading? Comments like that, or kids saying, one day, if I invite you to my wedding, will you come?
Right.
Or, I had a kid that came in his freshman year, and they put him one-on-one with me in a weightlifting class. And he was very aggressive. Mm-hmm. I had trash cans thrown at me, multiple things like that. And, you've worked a little bit with this student as well. And to see him now go into state testing and sit down and take the test and get up when he's finished and walk out and be calm and be successful that's rewarding. To see where he come from to where he is now.
Right, to see that growth of the students. Well, I appreciate the time taken.
No problem.
Thank you for meeting with me.
No problem.
And taking time out of your day, and I look forward to continue working with you.
All righty.
Thanks.
No problem.